Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Driving Collaboration and Alignment with a Clinically Integrated Supply Chain. I am Emily Rapley with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we will have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter Question for Staff and clicking Send. We look forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. In about a week following the webinar, we will send all registrants a copy of the presentation. This will be sent to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Jeff Chomsky is the Vice President of Customer Operations for Cardinal Health WaveMark. As a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, Jeff has spent the last 12 years of his career at Cardinal Health working with healthcare providers to improve efficiencies and lower costs. Upon joining Cardinal Health, Jeff ran inbound and outbound operations for the National Logistics Center, where he spent time with hospitals optimizing their supply chain. Jeff has held a number of roles across both the pharmaceutical and medical segments of Cardinal Health. His full understanding of the supply chain has enabled him to successfully achieve material efficiencies and deliver cost savings through collaborative efforts with hospitals. Prior to joining Cardinal Health, Jeff worked at Target Corporation and in healthcare consulting. Jeff is based in Chicago, Illinois, and graduated from Otterbein University. I'd also like to introduce Morgan Chadar, who is the Manager of Procedural Services at Nebraska Medicine's Bellevue Medical Center. Morgan oversees some of the most challenging and dynamic departments at one of the area's fastest growing provider sites. Heading up surgery, pre-op, PACU, cardiac cath lab, interventional radiology, endoscopy, and sterile processing, the depth and breadth of Morgan's responsibilities are a testament to her capability and range. Beginning her career with Nebraska Medicine as an operating room nurse in 2000, Morgan quickly established herself as a leader in Nebraska's most sophisticated surgery department. She stepped into a charge nurse role in 2007 and has served in her current capacity since 2015. One of her most notable experiences has been serving in the IDN's state-of-the-art biocontainment unit, one of only a few nationwide that recently treated Ebola patients requiring some of the most complex treatment regimens ever developed. Morgan has articles published in OR Manager, been interviewed for Nebraska Public Television's coverage of Ebola, and spoken at industry gatherings like the ANCC National Magnet Conference. She received her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the College of St. Mary. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Jeff to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for that great introduction. Morgan and I are excited to be here today to share our perspective on how we developed a sustainable and clinically integrated supply chain within the Nebraska Medicine healthcare system. First, we want to give a couple of second overview of our learning objectives for the day. The first is discuss the importance of clinical and supply chain alignment and how that successful integration can impact cost and patient outcomes. Second, we like to identify the ways supply chain integration enhances workflow and helps break down communication silos between supply chain and clinical teams. And third, we like to share some best practices that we've developed to help achieve that integration with supply chain automation and how that can bring long-term success to the health system. But first, Morgan and I want to give a quick overview of both Cardinal Health and Nebraska Medicine. As one of the largest healthcare supply chains in North America, Cardinal Health is essential to care. Many of our customers know us as a leading healthcare logistics company, and we are proud of that strong foundation. As you can see, we've been recognized by Gartner as one of the top leaders in supply chain transformation for the past 10 years. We have over 40 years of experience providing supply chain service solutions to the healthcare industry. And recently, Cardinal Health's investment in WaveMark Supply Management Solutions is just one of the ways Cardinal is showing our commitment to innovation with technology and data solutions. Currently, WaveMark is making an impact in over 220 hospitals across the United States, including Nebraska Medicine. With healthcare changing every day, we understand the pressures on our customers we understand the challenges our customers have with reducing the cost of care while increasing quality and patient-driven outcomes. It's no small feat, and with Cardinal Health WaveMark, we seek to work together to provide innovative solutions to solve for some of healthcare's most persistent challenges. With that, I'll transition it to Morgan so she can give a quick overview of Nebraska Medicine, and we can start our first objective.
Well, thank you again, Emily and Jeff and Beckers, for that kind introduction. Today, a little bit about Nebraska Medicine, just to set the stage. So Nebraska Medicine serves the Omaha metropolitan community with 2 hospital locations, just about 809 licensed beds, about 8,000 employees, 1,000 physicians, and this $1.2 billion in academic health system, which is amazing. That impacts, how we're nationally recognized as one of the top 100 hospitals in America for 5 straight years, plus being recognized by the U.S. News and World Report as a top-rated hospital for 7 consecutive years. How do we do that? It really is led by our mission. Nebraska Medicine, in our joint partnership with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, our mission is to lead the world in transforming lives, to create a healthy future for all individuals and communities through premier educational programs, innovative research, and extraordinary patient care. And that focus on that extraordinary patient care and outcomes really leads us into kind of dissecting that first objective that Jeff spoke about. So without further ado, let's move to our first objective. Objective 1 is to discuss the importance of clinical and supply chain alignment and how successful integration can impact cost and patient outcomes. The focus here being procedure-based care is imperative that I have the correct supply for the correct patient at the correct time. And how do we go about doing that with a joint partnership and all of the players sitting around the table? And we're going to really kind of walk through what that looks like. So what does a clinically integrated supply chain look like, and why is it created? Well, you need to have stakeholders that are invested in identifying those supplies. Your clinical teams, the people that are providing the care to your patients day in and day out, your nurses, your surgical technologists, your radiology technologists, whoever that may be. Plus, you need to have the supply chain, and not just the leaders of supply chain, but the people that do the job in the hospitals every day, coming and touching those departments. And then you have to have the support of your leadership on both sides, really coming around to that stakeholder aspect on that. You have to be able to look at your processes and not be at that stage where we're unwilling to change processes, but how can we make this, how can we enhance, how can we collaborate and drive excellent processes that may be totally new. And then you also want to improve. At the end of the day, we're here to serve our patients and our communities, so you want cost, quality, and outcomes to really showcase our expertise in this area. And that is integration at its highest potential with that clinically integrated supply chain. So we all look at these graphs, no matter if you're in supply chain, if you're in the healthcare side of things, and if you're in the finance department. We stare at these graphs looking at where is our revenue currently and where is our expense. And every year, these graphs inch down closer and closer and closer together. So how are we going to do this, and why is this happening to us currently in the medical field? Well, there are ingredients that are fueling that. There's lower reimbursement rates. There's this massive shift for patients now to be more ambulatory or outpatient care versus that inpatient care regimen. You also have rising ambulatory competition. We can Google where we're going to get our next procedure that we need done, whether that be a scan or a biopsy completed. We can Google who has the best outcomes and what's the cost potentially for me on that. And then we have these merger and acquisition activities where your ability to go maybe out of your network is slightly reduced because there's not very many options out there that are falling in and out of network. So those are some impacts that we are constantly challenged with, but we still want to provide that awesome high quality care to the patients and our communities that we're working within. So where does that mean? That means that we've got to get that integration from a clinical standpoint. And as a nurse, I was not always well-versed and well-trained in the clinical supply chain aspect on that, but I was well-versed and trained in providing care every day. So recent data is showing that clinically integrated mindset is starting to show progression in healthcare, and this re-engagement or re-empowerment of physicians and clinicians to help support that. So if you look at this slide and it says, positive trends, right? 80% of surgeons and procurement officers say that they're working collaboration to repurchase medical equipment, but with that medical equipment purchase is also the supply side of that. Is there a way of which we can standardize equipment across healthcare systems? Is there a way of which we can reduce our inventory and make sure we have that one right product for the right patient at the correct time? And then you have 70% of surgeons state that economic value of product was important in making their final decision. Providers and clinicians are willing to partner with leadership on really driving that cost of care down. So if you have options between two like items and you can get your providers and your surgeons and your clinicians to come to the table and have really great data-driven conversations about, is there really that much difference between one widget or the other, and can we make a standardization option in that? Those are positive trends that we have when we're managing supplies. But we do still have room for improvement, and we always will. 43% of surgeons believe their procurement department improves quality cost of care. This is probably on the ownership of our leadership structure, just we're not sharing our great data that we are doing when we start this journey. Not always is it going to be, you know, 6-figure, 7-figure savings, but sometimes you need to celebrate some of your smaller costs while you're driving, because they add up, and you get this momentum as you're driving that front healthcare, along that track. So, what do we have to do? Let's understand why. Jeff can speak to this picture. This is actually a real picture and real staff that work at Nebraska Medicine Bellevue location, and we were trying to get creative and partnering with our supply chain to reduce our inventory. So we took everything out of the cabinet. I allowed the staff to come into the department, and we took everything out of the cabinets and designed workflow. And with that, they ended up reducing their inventory within one of these rooms by about 33%. And this was just something that we did one day. And it was a great workout for staff to realize that we can think broader than just looking at spreadsheets and so on and so forth. That if we actually take the time to get into that room and look at what we have in our shelves, and if there's opportunities to reduce it, you're going to get some momentum on that.
And I think, Morgan, the other good thing to point out here is you said you did it one day. You were able to convince leadership through the partnership and the communication that you had with them to close the lab down and actually not do any cases that day in a fairly busy lab, to allow the staff to design their workflow and reduce 33% of the product that was in that room.
Agreed.
Which I think is amazing.
Agreed. And it allows them to actually see the work that leadership is trying to get out in front of on that reducing the cost. But they have such visibility as to what they need to provide care every day that we should be supporting them in their efforts and working towards that. So agreed. So we'd like to kind of summarize and take a polling question. As stakeholders in your supply chain strategy, where do you see your health system's primary goal in cost cutting and standardization when it comes to products in your supply chain? Is it commodity products, mid-range products, physician preference islands, equal priority among all the products? Like, where do you believe that you could start at? What is your stakeholder on that? What are your thoughts initially? You know, Jeff, I think you and I would agree that we could probably, equal priority among products seems to be driving ahead. I would agree with you. On that. Sometimes, and it's been my experience on occasion, that if you start with commodity products, you get some momentum and you can see kind of some of the work in because they're, in boxes. Let's say exam gloves for a descriptor. Providers really don't per se care on their commodity products unless you're going to take away skull caps or something of that nature, of which then they're going to be like, hey, now we like our skull caps, or force them to wear beard covers. Physician and preference items, that can be a dynamic conversation, which I think we'll highlight on. You really have to have engagement from your providers to have those physician-driven conversations, because everybody wants something specific. But how do you then fuel this as you're kind of moving forward? All right, so institutional transformation, where does that come from, and how do you start the process? If you look at this, you'll say 47% of frontline clinicians say they don't trust the quality of their organization's supply chain management process. And Jeff and I have spoken this numerous times. I would agree with that statement. You're always concerned about having the right product for the right case. And what happens if I drop one? Do I have an extra in there? And this is kind of some of you've got to lay that out on the table before you get started. Our goal is always to have enough supply and products for your highest volume week throughout a 365-day period, and looking at how you can order that product in, how you stock it is part of that, and sometimes you need to partner with your clinicians in doing that. 73% of physicians didn't have the right product available during a procedure. So this is an interesting statistic that can take twofold on it. Is it the right product, or is it maybe they want one product versus the other but serves as the same functionality of it? As you standardize and look at physician preferences, you're going to have to kind of be very diligent in expressing this is the momentum and the goal that we're having to be able to provide that high quality patient care, but through an integrated supply chain where we're watching that overall cost. And what does that look like? And the last thing is, which really is kind of our mission, should always be our mission, is to provide excellent patient care. 69% of hospital staff reported delays or cancellations due to missing supplies. And sometimes that's not known until the day of, which is there a way that we can mitigate that and really reduce that? Your patients are going through all of their, NPO status or not being able to eat or doing all these pre-tests to come to have a procedure done or receive care, and then not being able to provide that care or that service to that patient really adds a disservice to your overall patient experience and the goal of which we all collaborate to achieve, which is delivering high quality patient care. Can you reduce that risk? Is there technology that can support your work on letting you know when something is critically low in your supply chain, or you've got a back order, or a product has been recalled before that patient arrives that day? And so this is kind of some of that stakeholder trust that we're going to have to overcome in order to have this clinically integrated supply chain system. So when you look at that, what's the benefits, right? We went through some of the concerns just on that last slide in regards to stakeholder trust and some of the challenges that providers feel and are voicing, but then you have this critical impact for the business. And this is hard dollar savings and soft dollar savings. The hard dollar savings is minimizing non-contract spend, reducing the same, we'll pick on supply or exam gloves because we can. There's options out there. Clinics may be using different exam gloves than the hospitals are using. Is there a way that you can standardize that to one and then maybe get a better contract on doing that, on increasing that spend? The minimized labor management expense for unnecessary products, this is something that is, yes, hard dollar savings, but there's also such a positive impact on a personal level that you're not worried about that next case or that next procedure that you have to have on that. And then you have decreased overnight freight spend. And I can speak to this a lot. When I first entered into the management realm for procedure-based care, I was shocked, to say it very cleanly, on how much we were actually spending on overnight freight. Providers calling at 6 p.m. the night before for a case at 8 o'clock in the morning want us to overnight something from Boston. And if you're currently in our state of where we live right now in Nebraska with our 50 plus inches of snow, sometimes that just is not going to happen. And so how can you make sure that you have the right product for those cases, and really implore for providers to plan ahead or use what we currently have on the shelf to do some of that work. Soft dollar savings, increasing sourcing leverage. Where are you getting it from? Is there a way that we can reduce shipping? Better spatial management, reflecting back on that picture where you saw the staff taking all of those supplies out. If you can reduce your inventory even by that 33% in a 1-day, 8-hour shift work, your spatial management and your ability for staff to know where they're going to get their needed supply for a case in the workroom is fantastic. They're actually going to have an increased time at the bedside. You're going to have more accurate product demand and expense predictions. Budget. We're all entering the budget time of the year where we're looking at this. You've got to do some work on that. Is there a way of reducing kind of that product demand and that expenses around that by enhancing contracts and doing some of those other items and getting rebates? The right product at the right time for the right care of the patient. This is all going to impact your Press Ganey or your patient satisfaction scores and wanting to drive that business. It goes back to that old adage where you go out to eat at a restaurant. It takes one good comment to 10 negative comments, or however that may work, where the negative is actually going to spread faster than the positive. And you really want to get ahead of that so your patients can go, hey, I went to see Dr. So-and-so, and the care that they gave patients was just awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, Morgan, and I'll add here. I think this is one of those things that, as the clinician piece of it, you would to kind of refamiliarize yourself with these concepts, right?
Agreed.
It wasn't you were focused on patient care. There was a business aspect to it, but as this integration happened, you had to refamiliarize yourself with the hard dollar and soft dollar savings and how they could be realized, especially when it came to that workflow you talked about.
Agreed.
But there's a stat that says if if the clinicians are able to design their own workflow, you get about 2.5 hours back at the patient bedside.
Agreed.
So it's really interesting to see that when you look at some of those soft dollar savings, that 2.5 hours is kind of lumped into that, where when we showed that picture and they were able to design their own workflow, that actually increased their time at the patient bedside.
Agreed. They can form those relationships with the patient and their families and really work to design that high quality care on that. So it is one of those things that, yes, is a soft dollar savings, but so beneficial on the back end as we're kind of looking at that. So positive patient impact, this kind of goes back to that. The clinically integrated supply chain, procedural readiness, and improved quality outcomes and optimal patient experience. These are the positive patient impacts that are in part of that soft dollar savings. The right product, the right place, the right time, and the right patient. As a clinician, you have to have an appreciation and understanding of what supply chain does to help support that. I wasn't always aware of that. There is some really good work on having very candid conversations, which hopefully you'll be able to hear some of that between Jeff and I on understanding their challenges and their impacts on that. Cases happen at the time and the care happened as expected. I've been an operating room nurse for 19 years, and I can't tell you maybe a handful of times where a surgical procedure actually went off as scheduled with no, like, oh, surprises in the middle of it. So how does that impact when you really want to make sure that your product and your quality will be very, very positively impacted for that patient? So just something to really kind of look at as you're looking at the positive impact and things like that. Jeff, do you have anything to add here?
Well, I just think it really comes down to when you have that supply chain and clinical teams integrated, and they're really aligned on process. So they're aligned on the supply chain processes that enable the clinical processes, and those clinical processes that feed into kind of the reorder point. You do have an expanded portfolio that you can keep because you're keeping the right stuff. You know, you pulled out 33% of those products. You're keeping the right things on the shelf. You're actually able to put potentially lower product volume and the number of products on the shelf and not impact patient care. So I think that's where a lot of those silos start to be built up, is if I don't have one of everything on the shelf, or I need this once a year and I have to have it, it really allows folks to have that positive patient impact by being able to see, you know, your folks come to you and say, hey, Morgan, I know we got 2 of these left. I'm going to be out of them, because now there's room on the shelf to be able to see that.
Yeah, to be able to assess the urgency of how we're going to get supplies in. And also along with that, you also then have those candid conversations. That is, if IR or cath lab is stocking that product, do I necessarily need to add it into the OR stock, or can we look at only having site-specific or department-specific areas where you don't need to stock 3 of everything in every different department? Maybe you could stock 5 in one department, and then just have a technology support where you're going to be using that and being able to shift that cost, so on and so forth. So Jeff really highlighted silos, which kind of moves us into objective 2. Identify ways that supply chain integration helps break down communication silos and enhances workflows between supply chain, clinical teams, and learn steps to initiate change in your healthcare system. So I have loved telling this story. I'm an operating room nurse. But as we kind of look at that, you have to look at your biggest challenges in creating a clinically integrated supply chain in your healthcare system. What are your hiccups in this? Do you feel it's a misaligned priorities between supply chain and clinical teams? Do you think it's the lack of trust among stakeholders? Siloed work streams, again, not having that insight as to the impact between supply chain and clinical providers and so on and so forth. Is it communication gaps between departments? And our team's too scared to challenge the status quo, which I'm only chuckling because sometimes you are fearful as you're walking this unknown path. Communication gaps between departments. I would support that, actually, answer very transparently. There is communication gaps between departments, and how do you start breaking down those communication gaps and those siloed work streams and those lack of trust among stakeholders or misaligned priorities? I think it's interesting when you talk about misaligned priorities and siloed work streams, there's a lack of transparency between departments. And we won't bore you with Jeff and our dynamics as to how we first met, but it wasn't a positive experience just because I was unaware. I was ignorant as to what supply chain had to go through in terms of to get me my right supply at the right number for the right case for the right time. And while Jeff says he wasn't ignorant, and I'll speak for him on this, as to my challenges, we just didn't have that open communication. There was really those non-communication gaps, or there was a communication gap between us. So how do we break that down?
And it was funny, you called me a liar the first time we met.
Yep, I sure did.
But at least that opened up the communication, right?
It did actually open the communication. We've been on a steady path ever since, trying to really integrate supply chain, having those transparent conversations. So we're going to talk about my journey and how I kind of worded it to Jeff as we looked through this. This could be described as a wheel with, spokes in the wheel, however you want to do it. I use a triangle all the time because I want my patient to be very impacted by supply chain, providers, and clinician in a positive manner. So if you look at it for the way that I view this, supply chain has a kind of a relationship with our providers, right? The providers are going to request a certain widget from a certain vendor. Supply chain helps us, partners with us to get that. The clinicians then need to know where that item, that widget is being stocked at, what's our inventory order on that, how long does it take us to get. And then clinicians and providers also have to have that conversation of, sir, I understand that you requested widget A. Our contracts say that we're going to go with widget B because we've got a spend agreement with a certain contract. How do we kind of mirror all of those, have those dynamic, data-driven conversations? And in the middle of it is the reason why we all are so passionate about this is our patients, right? So our patients kind of are in the mix of all of these triangles, touching everything with a broad side. It's not just a little tiny poke of the supply chain has to the patient and clinicians have to the patient and providers. It is all of us really in this, forming this awesome pyramid with our patients being at the center of where we're going with that. So how did NMC achieve clinical integration? What does that look like? We really did do some work on breaking down the silos and improving workflow. Yes, our first silo breaking down was me calling Jeff a liar, but we had to earn trust. Jeff had to come in and I had to come to the table. And he had to very dynamically tell me about the challenges with supply chain management and contracts. And if you tell me I'm going to get 10, then you have to understand how to manage 10. And I have to say, hey, is there a way that we could reduce that inventory or spread that inventory so I'm not stocking 10? And you really have those conversations about it. You bring stakeholders along for the journey. So you're going to have to, I think Jeff and I would agree, you would have to identify a provider that is like, hey, I want to make this lab or this department awesome. I think we could do that if we can look at some of our inventory, costs and challenges that we have. They'll be as transparent as you want them to be to tell you. Some of their frustration is believing that they don't have the right product for the right patient at the right time, and how you can kind of break down those communication gaps between that so they can have those data-driven, dynamic conversations with everybody on your clinical integration team. You can use data to drive these conversations. I love data when it comes to having the provider. I want you to bring this brand new widget in for this one case, and it's going to change the way that I deliver care. And so you bring that brand new widget in, and then it sits on your shelf. And nobody touches the widget that they wanted so badly and you worked so hard to get. Some of that could be because they're not aware that it's on the shelf, that you didn't communicate out, but also it could be the fact that they really just thought that they wanted this widget, but they actually ended up not changing their practice. So how can you have those data-driven conversations where you can go to a provider and have a conversation that mirrors, hey, sir or ma'am, I put that widget that you had asked on the shelf. It's here. Today is February 1st. We're going to assess your usage of this product for the next 90 days, and then you and I will have another conversation follow-up with some data that we're going to pull out of our supply chain management system so we can see how often you've used it, how many orders or triggers we've triggered on a reorder. And then it also supports the fact that you can go back to a provider or clinician and say, I put this on the shelf. You may not use, I don't believe you've used it in the last 90 days. What are we going to do with that? And is there a way that we can return it to the manufacturer? You can make changes slowly and see the benefits. If you so choose with your clinical integration system and you're wanting to reduce costs to tackle provider preferences, by all means, I'm not going to tell you, no, don't do it. But sometimes if you take a step back and go for your commodity style items, you can gain momentum and kind of drive this and celebrate your successes forward. Not always is it going to be well received. And so sometimes getting that momentum so they can see the benefit on slower or smaller items really will drive that wheel down the road. So so you can have those provider specific. And embrace the small wins and the big wins. Offline or online, I could tell you about some conversations with providers that maybe weren't very successful, and I had to step back and look at my failures as communicating that, but I also wanted to encourage our small wins to say, remember the time when you came to me and you could never have that one gadget or gizmo for your cases because it was never standardly on the shelf and it was always hit or miss. Look, I haven't had that conversation with you for 6 months and you've used 25 of these. You know, celebrate those small wins and kind of gain their buy-in as you're doing it. Improving workflow, this is again some of that soft dollar savings that we talk about. You work to identify gaps. You know, if it is doing cycle counts or if it's doing all of those, you know, outdates, you can have those opportunities to look at your workflow and how you can come together and kind of collaborate on what is going to be a solution for it. You've got to create mutual goals. I think this is probably one of the starting points for any clinically integrated team is to really sit down and go, what's my number one priority? And you know, hopefully that's centered around a patient and not always cost, but the cost is an added benefit of that. You know, that you can have that mutual goal. You have to define specific roles of stakeholders. You know, if it's a provider that needs to assess if there is enough similarity between two like items to drive maybe picking one or the other, you need somebody who is a provider that uses it all the time. You know, you can't necessarily have a provider that, let's say, you can't, no, maybe you can, but I wouldn't say yes. You can't have an ophthalmologist making decisions about a GYN, you know, device. That's probably, I mean, you can, but I don't know if that'd be well received. And then you have to assess the progress, right? Don't approach it, or I'd be cautious on approaching. I'm going to say don't. I would be cautious on approaching this as a massive hurricane that you're going to just, you know, turn upside down the apple cart and then try to figure out how you're going to pick it all up. That you really go at it as a staged, you know, step one, maybe let's define our goals. Step two is let's look for some low-hanging fruit, you know, that we can gain some success on and then kind of go about that. And then redefine your processes based on learnings as kind of the final bullet point here. Yeah, we all learn continuously. Some integration is a little bit easier to undertake than others. And, you know, and that's just how you go about it. So reassess.
And I think that brings up a good point, Morgan. When you start to look at the clinical integration of supply chain, we had a little hiccup with that when we first started here.
Right.
We tried to just lay that technology over an already existing process.
Agreed.
And that technology showed some gaps in the process. And I think that's where that picture was born from.
Right.
Finally, it got to the point where we had a frank conversation. We pulled everything out. We looked at the process and we looked at the inventory that was there. Mm-hmm. And we started to kind of work through this cycle.
Agreed. Data and analysis. So we went through implement new process before we ever did the data and analysis. And I'm going to tell you that didn't work. And Jeff will support me in saying that. It really did not work. Technology is not going to solve your challenges. It's going to either enhance your challenges or you're going to have to step back and partner with, do the data analysis before you do it. So you can't lay technology over an already borderline erupting volcano. I'm out of something else to describe it as. It just isn't going to work. You know, the technology is going to blow up with the volcano, I promise. But if you step back and you actually do the data analysis and really look and really have those candid, dynamic conversations with your providers that go, hey, this is what we need for our highest volume in 365. You know, for all of the supplies in, let's say, procedure-based room, we'll pick on IR-CAS because they're kind of always dynamic. With that, is there opportunity for us to reduce some of this? Is there an opportunity for us to cut overnight shipping expenses? Then you have to kind of go through this circle and this wheel. I like to refer to this as a wheel, as it's turning down the road. You got to communicate your results. You got to review and assess. You have to assess the situation and the current challenges that we're facing. You know, the find supporters and dissenters and leadership champions. There is always going to be a naysayer in your clinically integrated system group, but those naysayers get far and few between if you really do communicate your results. You know, you have to set your vision and your common goal and kind of work to achieve that as you're working along this. Build a business case. You know, when you're adding new supplies onto your shelves for a provider that is coming in, you know, really state, look, we're willing to add this for 90 days once you really get your practice up and running, but then we want to assess what your usage is on that, and then if there's an opportunity to remove something else that we're no longer using. You have to achieve leadership approval. I think that's probably one of the things that you should do while you're gathering data and analysis, but I like it there. And then implement new processes, which really doesn't have to be leadership driven. That can be clinician and supply chain driven, as those people are doing these tasks day in and day out.
And I think it's a good point. This certainly becomes part of your DNA, and I think it's become part of your team's DNA around whether they use sticky notes to put on products they don't use or haven't used in the last 90 days, or whether just the other day they brought you product from a supplier or from a provider who had left and said, look, Morgan, I know this doesn't expire for 2.5 years, but we've got to get it out of here. Someone who will use it, main campus up the road or somewhere else, because in 2 years we're going to be having the conversation. It's going to expire in 60 or 30 days. No,
I would agree with you. And it really, once you get the ball rolling down the hill, or however you want to look at it, they are really going to take it and go, because they like their reduced inventory. It's easier for them to find their needed product, in an urgent or emergent situation when they've got to go to those cabinets. And then they feel like they have ownership in the business side of healthcare, which, yes, they own their patient, saying hello and doing all the 5 rights and all of those touches that they have to have for that patient. But to provide insight to the business side allows them to partner with you in that end goal, where you're looking at that graph again, 10 slides prior to this, of which your revenue is not always meeting your expenses, and that gap is getting smaller as we kind of walk down this path. So Jeff, I think you take charge on objective 3.
I do. Morgan, thanks first for sharing that story. I know I kind of interjected a little bit, but it's nice to hear a success story. Right. There were some opportunities or failures in there that you communicated, but it's nice to hear that success story. So objective 3, really we want to talk about the best practices to achieve integration and how supply chain automation can support kind of that long-term success in your health system. We'll start with the final poll, and let me read you the question, and we'll go through some of the answers and then give you guys a chance to answer. At what point in your sourcing practices do clinicians have a majority say in the type of product that's stocked? Is it your commodity products? Is it your kind of mid-range endomechanicals or sutures, or is it your physician preference items? Or does supply chain make the totality of those stocking decisions? We'll give everyone a few seconds to answer, and then we'll talk about the results. All right, great. So it looks as if, and this is just what Morgan and I have found too, as she kind of articulated earlier in the broadcast, really physician preference items are where a majority of clinicians have say in what's stocked on the shelf. And I think Morgan would support it. Your clinicians here have still a majority of the say in those items. Again, save those items like bouffant caps and beard covers and things like that, but they're mostly involved in physician preference items. Agreed.
They are 100% involved in physician preference items. We send out the communication that says, hey, we're going to actually look at, let's say, stents. Let's look at cardiac stents. Does anybody have a strong line for one vendor or the other, and how do we go about that? They are absolutely engaged in that dynamic conversation, and us as clinicians support that conversation. But at the end of the day, we say it's either you have to pick maybe 1 or 2 if that's our goal, or maybe even only 1. And we 100% allow them to be engaged in that.
And I think that brings us to our next talking point, which is really around the data. The way that you transform the typical conversation, which is where we see clinicians mostly or providers mostly involved, which is in the physician preference item space, you are now able to bring data to them, whether it's data about you haven't used this product in the last 90 days, or data around the fact that this product doesn't appreciably, or this product appreciably costs more than one that's comparable and offers no different outcome or quality.
Agreed.
So when you look, you find that in a recent analysis, healthcare supply chain believes that with data, there can be a potential 18% savings. And if you believe Forbes, it indicates that 66% of supply chain leaders say that advanced supply chain analytics are critically important to their supply chain over the next 2 to 3 years. And Morgan's seen this. She's lived this. The first day you brought data, you cleaned out 33% of your products. A little less than that in value because most of them were the lower hanging fruit or the non-physician preference items, but you continue to use that data and that muscle that the organization's built to drive that sustained savings over 2 and 3 years. which is important. And it's important to be able to gather that data. So we want to make sure not only that we talk about the importance of data, but we want to talk about how Wavemark and Cardinal allowed Morgan to collect that data and how the system works for her as it pulls pieces together, and how it works for other customers that we're serving. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the data supporting the clinically integrated supply chain, you see a couple of different pieces. And I know the slide is fairly busy, but I'll walk through it, and I think it's fairly simple as we talk about it. Every provider is working in probably 2 or 3 systems, potentially the MMIS system, depending on the role. You certainly have the clinical systems like your HEMO and your ORIS, and then you have the electronic medical record pieces. So all 3 of those operate independently, and it's really the interoperability of those systems that's important. For example, when you bring data to a VAT committee, or you have to bring data to clinicians about usage and outcomes, oftentimes you're pulling data from at least these 3 systems, if not more, putting them in a spreadsheet. And once you have all the data, which is ultimately difficult to get, then you have to find some way to do an analysis on those to make sure that the data is supporting the decisions that we're trying to make, or at least it's supporting a decision. It's not enough to have the data, you have to have it at least analyzed. And the way that Wavemark and Cardinal bring together this piece is there's 4 distinct type of products that have to be tracked. It's low dollar consumables. That stuff you saw on the picture that Morgan had pulled out, which is tracked in kind of a Kanban. And then you look at the ability to track higher or middle dollar supplies with either barcode or RFID. That piece culminates at the point of use, and I think it's important. The point of use station is what allows that collection of data. It's at the point the device or the product is going to be used on the patient, and it then documents to the clinical systems and the medical record. It also informs the MMIS of how we're going and what products we need to order. But all of that also comes out to you on the back end, Morgan, in a way to really crunch that data and really analyze the data, because it's all in one place for you when it's available to download and to use fairly quickly. So it really does make a difference when all the data sits in one place. And it allows for 3 different pieces that Morgan's hit on, and I just want to make sure that we walk through and kind of cover here as we're getting towards the end. It is the patient experience. It's the right product at the right place for the right patient. And it's also those clinicians being able to see that work, that build that trust. It really does allow clinicians to practice at the top of their licensure. The second piece is that workflow improvement that we've talked about today, and it really is about clinicians designing and operating an optimal performance to improve quality and outcomes. And it's the focus on the patient, and it's not focusing on how many supplies I have on the shelf, or do I have what I need for tomorrow, or how do I work through these things. And the last is certainly kind of the operational clarity. It's that data we just talked about, the interoperability of multiple systems where everyone struggles to pull data from as they work through. And it really is delivering insights on that data that allows for those conversations, that allows you to break down silos and build trust and have impactful conversations with providers, clinicians, supply chain, hospital leadership, and it allows you to show that savings. And that's where really what we're getting at here is it is a financial impact, which is so important to the hospital, but it's also a patient care impact. And it also shows that there's a lot of belief out there among leadership, among clinicians, even among supply chain in places, that when you reduce the amount of supplies you have on your shelf or your supply spend, you're actually impacting patient care negatively, that quality and outcome piece. And I think we've seen numerous examples both today and in the news that show us that you can reduce supply spend while improving patient care. Those two are certainly exclusive of one another. So as long as you have the right product on the shelf to take care of the right patient at the right time, you can certainly do those things, and you can certainly improve your patient care and your outcomes.
Agreed. And it'll allow for you to have those breakdown of those silos, which I think we kind of get into in our workflow. It's all about my department and so on and so forth, but it's really about the patient's experience overall.
Agreed.
And you have to get through those silos to kind of get that done.
Agreed. So at this point, I want to transition it back over to Morgan. We wanted to leave some time for questions, but I'd like Morgan to kind of wrap up with, I opened with covering the 3 learning objectives, but I'd like Morgan to wrap up as we kind of walk through the last slide here of the learning objectives and her final thoughts.
Right. So hopefully you've learned over the webinar the answer to the following, like why is clinically integrated supply chain so critical at improving patient outcomes and improving your costs? They go hand in hand, and you can't. I think I would challenge you to say one doesn't go without the other. And then, what are the critical steps in gaining alignment and starting your journey into that integration? Breaking down those silos is really key in those first critical steps as you're in creating that common goal. Jeff and I didn't start out with a common goal, but we ended with, I think we're still on a common goal journey as we walk through, our relationship with integrated supply chain. And then how can automation and technology help you achieve sustainability with clinical integration? Again, I can't stress this enough. Technology cannot fix a challenge that you already have. It will partner with you to enhance new processes so that you don't have those supply chain challenges. Taking that step back and really doing the data analysis will really, really drive technology support of that. So that's kind of where I was at. So Jeff and I really, again, want to thank you for taking your time today, and we are more than willing to respond to any questions that you have at the closure of this webinar.
Great. With that, I think we'll turn it back over to Emily to start the questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Morgan. That was a fantastic presentation. Before we begin the question and answer session, I just want to make one quick note for our audience. So after the webinar, a post-webinar survey will pop up on screen. We at Becker's and our presenters today would greatly value your feedback, so please take some time to fill that out. So with that, we can go ahead and begin our question and answer session. As a quick reminder, you can submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space that says enter a question for staff and clicking send. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for today. So it looks like a lot of great questions are rolling in. This first question is from James. He writes, we're a small health system. How do we convince leadership to invest in this type of technology when they see other opportunities as a priority?
I will actually take that one on. Being a smaller community-based hospital within the Nebraska medicine system, we gained kind of momentum by showcasing our opportunities with low-hanging fruit to kind of gain that momentum and go, hey, let's really try this. Let's make sure that we reduce, the amount of inventory space that we have on kind of going this, and really showcasing your first couple of steps and that you've got a common mission or a common goal that you're working with supply chain on, and you've got a clinical provider that's willing to partner with you, will really set that ball in motion, and then you can really go to leadership and gain that momentum as you're kind of going down. But celebrate your small successes when you first tackle this integrated supply chain.
Thanks, Morgan. That was really helpful. So for our next question, this is from Rebecca, and Morgan, I think this might be a great one for you. After starting your project to gain clinical integration, what roadblocks did you encounter that made you feel like integration just wasn't possible? And what did you do to overcome these roadblocks, and did it work and to get the project back on track?
So I think the roadblocks just come from, there's this question of, is it going to be possible? Are you going to be able to reduce our inventory and have the supplies that you need to provide patient care? And again, it kind of goes back to go for your commodity-based items maybe first to gain that momentum, and then see how you can use that momentum to build trust with your providers and your clinicians. Your clinicians are really going to have to partner with you to drive this and overcome some of the obstacles on those roadblocks, because they're the ones that have the ear of the provider through the majority of when they're providing care to the patients, and so on and so forth. And if you can find a physician champion to walk with you in this journey, it will really gain momentum as you go.
Thank you, Morgan. That was great. So clinician partnerships, physician champions, excellent. So we have a lot of great questions coming in. Our next question is from Stephen. Do you have to have Cardinal Health distribution to use WaveMark?
I think I'll take that one. It's going to be a short answer. The answer is no. The system is agnostic to a distributor. It's agnostic to the type of product. It really just, the only real determinant of the wave mark and how it tracks certain products is the cost of the product or how it actually will interact with the clinician's workflow. So no requirement to have Cardinal distribution, just an understanding of the integration with the workflow and with supply chain and the clinical pieces. So great question, though. It's a question we get a lot.
Thanks so much, Jeff. So let's move on to our next question. This question is from Michael. He asks, do you carve out physician preference implants like pacemakers, or do you use GPO contracts?
We don't carve out pacemakers or use GPO contracts. We actually, this is where your partnership or having that one clinical provider to really dissect all of that data that you have, like who's using what implants or let's pick pacemakers. We all know that there's a handful of companies that create pacemakers. So we engage them as to what are the benefits if we standardize to one. It was an outlier of two, contractors in that pacemaker realm. And are people willing to come to the table to do such things? Is there a benefit? Can we add equipment if we reduce it down to maybe 2 vendors versus 3? And really start that. Michael, I would say really identify a physician champion to walk you through doing that. It is possible to standardize your pacemakers and walking through that.
And I think this is the piece that the simple answer is no, you haven't carved them out. But this is where the supply chain partnership really comes to bear.
Right.
We talk about supply chain, and the definition of that, I think, for us is not just the distribution folks and the folks that are bringing the product in on the dock. To us, it also includes that group, and it may not for everyone, which is why I want to make this clarifying statement. It may not include their sourcing department. It may not include that contracting department.
Agreed.
For us here, it does, but everywhere it might not. So it's
Agreed.
important that that's another stakeholder and partner that has to come to the table
Right.
on this.
You were correct. Yeah, it's totally possible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. So our next question comes from Chris. Chris would like to know what components of the supply chain present critical hurdles to desired integration. Is it people-based or systems-based?
You want
I think I can start. Yeah. I think it's both.
Yeah, I agree.
Morgan and I'll probably go the same places here. I think it is people and system-based.
Yeah.
I think when you kind of look over what's actually going on with supply chain, as you look at them independently, right, there's this piece, and Morgan, I think you spoke to this a little bit, that kind of the MMIS system is and should be for purchasing only, procurement only. It certainly feeds into some of the systems that the clinicians use.
Right.
But that was a barrier here,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a barrier to make sure that we understood that the right par levels are in place and the right system attributes were in place for those. What was the right lead time? How did it work?
Agreed.
But I think what we found as we walk through this journey is in almost every place from a system perspective, it was a human being making decisions that impacted how that system was set and the parameters that were set for the procurement of product,
Right.
the price of a product, the mode in which it got here,
Right.
the amount at which you order and things like that. And
Agreed.
oftentimes it was your budget. I'll order 20 if you want me to.
Right.
So I think there's definitely a piece of, there is system-based, but I think a lot of the times, and I'll say this just as our experience, not as everybody on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
we saw a lot of excuses for those things. A lot of
Agreed.
excuses around this is a system limitation. And when we really dug into it, it was really about people and process, and the system could do pretty much whatever we needed, whether it was the clinical system, whether it was WaveMark, whether it was the HEMO or ORS or medical records or MMIS system.
Right. And I think also, Jeff, we identified that the technology has to be managed by an individual, but you have to set roles for specific individuals. Not everybody can adjust PARs. PAR adjustment, PAR increases, and PAR decreases need to be led by one individual and one individual only, especially if it's a multifaceted department like mine is. I think that you have to have some of that oversight, because if everybody has access to it, then you're really not going to get on top of the battle.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And we have time for one more question. This last question comes from Wayne. He says, with our 900-bed hospital, the increase of recalls, back orders, discontinuations, shortages, along with finding substitutions, has created communication challenges. He asks, is there an effective way to communicate these to our clinical staff? Email captures some, but not all, and it lacks that closed-loop verification of the message received.
Wayne, I appreciate that question, and I totally get it. I think this really came to light. I'll give you a little bit of history on when the hurricane happened. I think it was last year, right? And it really impacted San Juan. And I couldn't keep up with all of the, the shortages and the back orders and some of those challenges. To say, emails only capture some, I get that. We use a variety of pieces in communicating all of this and identifying subs. Since we are kind of in a healthcare organization, sub-identification can happen at one of the hospitals versus the other. We could roll with that. And the communication typically goes from manager to manager out to staff. I use whiteboards to communicate critical low back orders. I've used emails. I've used stickers on the verbal notice too to communication. We actually have a safety huddle at Nebraska Medicine that occurs every morning at 7 o'clock in every department here. And that's where we communicate some of these critical back orders, whether it be medication driven or supply driven. And that's a partnership with supply chain to make sure that I get a back order report daily as to when we feel like the back order is going to be recalled. And if I feel it's critical, I will get to those staff safety huddles in the morning to communicate that information out, or the leads communicate it out for me if I'm not available. So we look at it kind of that way. And Jeff can pipe into that as well, but really that daily communication with back orders and the communication visibly to staff is kind of how we got to go about that.
Yeah, and I think, Morgan, I think that there's one piece here that if you take it back a step and look at kind of the root cause, you talked about the hurricane and how you identify subs. Yeah. I think there's a real piece with your system in Nebraska Medicine around the visibility of supply chain that you get from automation.
Agreed.
And being able to say, hey, I have a short-term back order, long-term are different, but discontinuation or shortage, where do I have product that's not moving? Or where do I have product stored that I have to have in the department? And you now have visibility of that to be able to reposition those products around where needed. That helps minimize some of those pieces, especially on short-term back orders where I'm not using lab 3 today. I can take some from here, put it where it needs to be, and I know that's getting well tomorrow or the next day. So you have that visibility to where we've actually helped look upstream to not have to communicate, to really ingrain that in your clinicians and your supply chain team to be able to reposition that inventory because they now have visibility. Agreed.
And that is just, having that open communication with your sites, Jeff, and how that goes. Hey, how many do you guys have on the shelf? And what does your case volume look like for the next couple of days? And can I borrow X, Y, and Z, and we'll get it back to you. So Wayne, I completely get it, and I could talk to you at hours about some challenges and successes we've had with that as we move forward. So.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for that great question, and Morgan and Jeff for the informative response. So that concludes our Q&A session today, and I would just like to remind our audience to fill out the post-webinar survey to help us improve future presentations. I'd also like to thank Jeff and Morgan for their excellent presentation, and Wavemark and Cardinal Health for sponsoring today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.